Welcome back to another explainer. Today, we're tackling a massive age-old question that has frustrated people for literally generations. Why is it that so many men fail at maintaining a woman's attraction over time? Well, the answer isn't about looks, and it definitely isn't about money. It actually comes down to a fundamental, widespread misunderstanding of human biology. So, we're going to map out the exact science of human attraction and show you precisely where things go off the rails.
Okay, let's dive into this biological roadmap. First, we'll examine the attraction disconnect. Then we'll walk through the chronological timeline of human attraction. Step 1 is establishing safety. Step 2 is building arousal. And Step 3 is sparking desire.
Section 1. The attraction disconnect. Male versus female lust.
To really understand where the breakdown happens in everyday relationships, we have to look back at a pivotal piece of research from the early 2000s. It definitively proved how fundamentally differently male and female lust functions at a neurological and biological level. Just look at this stark biological disconnect. For men, the timeline is pretty straightforward, right? It starts with physical desire, literally just physically wanting someone, and that directly moves to arousal. But for women, there's a mandatory prerequisite that men constantly overlook. Her timeline is safety, then arousal, and only then desire. If you try to jump straight to desire without that first step, the whole system just completely shuts down.
Section 2. Step 1. Establishing safety, the required first step. Establishing safety is the absolute bedrock of the entire process, and the absolute fastest way to shatter this required feeling is by being perceived as creepy. If a woman doesn't feel safe in her environment and with your presence, arousal and desire are biologically impossible. So what triggers that biological alarm? Well, a few years ago, researchers quite literally ranked the creepiest things a person can do. The top 3 are staring before interacting, touching too frequently, and prematurely steering conversations towards sex. So the crucial point is that avoiding these 3 specific researcher-ranked behaviors is your absolute baseline for success.
But this usually brings up a major question. Do wealth and fame somehow cancel out creepiness? A lot of people assume that if you have high status or a massive bank account, the biological rules just don't apply to you, and you can skip the safety step altogether. Let's see if that assumption actually holds up to reality.
And this brilliantly illustrates that status does not buy safety. Let's objectively contrast 2 highly successful, famous talk show hosts who are similar in age and looks. Take Conan O'Brien. In some past interactions with female guests, he displayed what experts call predatory nonverbals. We're talking head tilted down, hands pressed together without showing palms, leaning in way too quickly, and elongating his words. It instantly triggers alarm bells. Now contrast that with Craig Ferguson. He relies heavily on charming nonverbals. He leans out to respect personal space while keeping his legs near to signal interest safely. And when he does steer the conversation to sex, he doesn't do it out of the blue. He waits for the guest to open the door, then uses witty conversational pivoting. It's socially calibrated, safe, and entirely respectful.
Once you successfully navigate that first step, like Craig Ferguson does, magic happens. As the science shows, establishing safety unlocks a neutral state. When a girl actually feels safe, her brain naturally transitions. She's no longer on guard, she's now in a neutral zone where she becomes actively receptive to the next stage of the timeline.
Section 3. Step 2. Building arousal, sensory and visual data.
With safety locked in, we shift our focus to the sensory and visual data that actually drives arousal. And to do this properly, we need to explicitly focus on understanding what's known as the female gaze. Let's look at a fantastic recent case study, the hit show The Summer I Turned Pretty. This show was massively praised because of its unapologetic focus on visual details that align with the female gaze. Instead of typical cinematic shots, it focuses on specific body parts, the eyes, the back, the arms, and especially the hands. This aligns perfectly with studies on female visual preferences. Think about the kiss scenes in the show. They aren't just about the kiss itself, they specifically highlight the placements of the hands. It's incredibly effective sensory data.
But initiating physical touch in the real world requires a lot of nuance. Specifically, the psychological concept of plausible deniability. This is the difference between randomly grabbing someone by the waist, which instantly breaks that feeling of safety we just established, versus gently touching her waist as you politely guide her out a door. The physical sensory feeling is exactly the same, but the context transforms a socially uncalibrated brute into an exquisite gentleman. It's a flirty touch masked safely as a polite, helpful gesture.
Now, what's really interesting about this slide is that touch isn't the only driver of arousal. Researchers recently proved an incredible statistic in 2024. Just 1 single minute of mutual eye contact spikes attraction by about 35%. That is a massive neurological response to simply holding someone's gaze.
So how exactly do you maximize that 35% arousal metric smoothly without just staring and becoming the creepy guy from step 1? Well, you use the triangle method. This is a highly actionable eye contact technique used by charismatic figures like Matthew McConaughey to build tension. It's super simple and highly effective. First, look at one eye. Second, look at the other eye. Third, look down at the lips. And fourth, look right back up to the first eye. It breaks the intensity of a dead stare while clearly signaling deep, flirty focus.
Let's move to and see how this builds in Section 4. Step 3. Sparking desire. This is the final stage of our biological roadmap. Safety has opened the door, arousal has built the physical tension, and now we enter the phase where a woman consciously and unconsciously actively wants someone. To explain how this intense desire works, imagine being thrown into prison because you are simply too good at creating it. This is the captivating historical microstory of the first Duke of Lauzun. He was an average-looking guy who couldn't really rely on his physical presence, so he used calculated absence. He would have these initial, short, highly romantic meetings with noblewomen. Then, suddenly he'd exhibit completely cold and distant behavior. The women would spin out trying to understand his intentions. This worked so dangerously well that the extremely wealthy Duchess of Montpensier actually proposed to him. The king was so furious about this seduction that he sentenced the Duke to 10 long years in prison. But the Duke won the long game. After his release, he married the Duchess and became incredibly wealthy.
The crazy thing is, the Duke was practicing a brilliant form of science long before it even had a name. He was utilizing cognitive dissonance. This is a psychological phenomenon where contradictory behaviors, like being incredibly warm and flattering one day and completely cold the next, literally force the brain to justify the uncertainty. The human brain despises not knowing what's going on, so it bridges that gap by manufacturing attraction. Let's connect this psychological theory right back to you. Fundamentally, our brains hate uncertainty. When someone spends hours analyzing your mixed signals, wondering, did I do something wrong, or was he just being polite, they're investing massive amounts of mental energy into you. And to justify all that time spent obsessing over you, their brain simply decides, I must really like him. Rationalizing that obsession equals desire.
So now you have the complete biological roadmap. You know the 3 chronological steps: safety, arousal, and desire. But what if you don't have months or years to play the Duke's dangerous game of hot and cold? What speeds up this entire process from start to finish? Well, the answer lies in mastering something called sexual appeal, and that is exactly the piece of the puzzle we'll have to explore next time.